how tough is it for Flair or another airline to take on the big two?
So it's a really tough game. It's a tough industry globally, but certainly here in Canada, the industry's been dominated by the two big players for decades now, and so to come in and disrupt that in the way that Flair has, it's not easy work. It's a really tough ask, but we believe that it was required. We think that Canadians were paying too much for too long, and so we needed to come in and disrupt it. And I think we've done that. I think we've now got to the point where Canadians are enjoying lower airfares, not just on our flights, but because we're in the market, it's forced everyone else to bring their prices down as well. So, but it's not an easy game.
So the Competition Bureau of Canada is doing a market study, and one of the things they want to look into is how to make the industry more competitive. So ultimately, what would you say to the Government of Canada? What should it do to allow Flair, for example, to thrive, and to allow other airlines to come in and take on Air Canada and WestJet?
Yeah, so there are a few things I think that that I would point to. The first is actually the existence of Flair is a consequence of government policy, though in 2018 they opened up the foreign ownership rules to allow higher levels of foreign ownership. So at the moment, any non-Canadian can own up to 25% of an airline in Canada, and non-Canadians in aggregate can own up to 49%. I think I would start by removing the rule around the 25% and just say, doesn't matter whether it's one non-Canadian or 10 non-Canadians, it's a 49% limit for non-Canadians because that opens up the pool of investment. Starting up an airline is expensive. You know, they're expensive assets, it's hard to actually build your network, build your brand, so it's an expensive job. And we need access to some of the foreign capital. Canadian capital pools are a little bit more risk averse. So that would be one thing, would be opening up the foreign ownership rules a little more. I think there is something wrong with the airport charging system and the costs in the system. We operate in the leisure part of the market, and so that's really price sensitive. We put up our prices by $1 and someone else sits on the couch. You know, it's really, really sensitive. And this is an expensive system.
So you would like then to change the foreign ownership rules so that a single owner from another country up to 49%, right? You would like to see the airport fees reduced. What about the actual competition practices of, let's say, WestJet or Air Canada? What's that been like for you?
So that's been very aggressive at times. I think it's not in the interest of the big boys, what we call big Air Canada and WestJet, for Flair to survive, you know, for there to be a lot of competition. And so they've used different tools. I mean, the classic one was WestJet created Swoop. So Swoop wasn't created to foster competition. Swoop was created to quell competition. It was a deliberate tool in the WestJet portfolio that they used to chase us around the market.
So that's, I mean, potentially provocative statement. What would WestJet say if I quoted that to them?
Look, I think we could just, I'm sure they'd deny it. Of course they would, you know, it's what they do. And it's what airlines do to each other. They will, you know, they'll compete in whatever way they can. But the example would be, you know, we started a flight from Edmonton to Comox, so not a very common route. We started that route and within a month, Swoop had started that same route on the same days at the same time as us. We ultimately couldn't survive there. We left and then Swoop left. So that's the example of the sorts of behaviour. How do you change that? I think we need a mechanism somehow that acts faster, because by the time we've lodged a complaint and gone through and gathered the evidence, the game's over. You know, we've come out of that route. So we need some faster feedback on the predatory behaviour.
So let's talk a little bit about Flair. I host a call-in program on CBC Radio, and this month we did something about competition airlines. We had somebody call up and say how much they loved Flair, and they fly it out of Kitchener-Waterloo, and they love the prices. That wasn't a plant by you guys, was it? That
no,
caller? Okay.
I don't think there was an employee.
Yeah. But at the same time, you know, you do a quick Google search of Flair. Maybe this is true of all the airlines, but you see horror stories from passengers who talk about flights that have been delayed so long that in one case a woman, I think, missed a wedding that she was going to. What do you say when you see stories like that?
So firstly, there are a lot of people that love Flair. I fly on us a lot and the aircraft are full. So, there's a lot of people that do complain, but there's also a lot of quiet people that actually love Flair. But that said, we're far from perfect. This is a startup airline. It's a tough game. We've got a relatively small fleet, so our ability to recapture and the opportunity once a flight has been disrupted is less. And so I would apologise firstly to all of the people who have been disrupted, and to people who have missed events because of us. I would apologise for that. But I do think that it is an industry problem. We've had the best on-time performance regularly in Canada. We've got the best completion rate in Canada, and so it's not like
completion rate means
completion rate is the number of flights that you actually fly versus those that you scheduled. So it's a measure of the cancellation rate, I guess, the inverse of the cancellation rate. And we've got the best completion rate of any airline in Canada. We just don't have as much opportunity to recapture and fix up the problems when they go wrong.
So as you step down as the head of Flair, this is your opportunity to give us a state of the airline report. How is Flair doing?
So I think Flair's in the best shape it's ever been in. I think we're going into a summer where we're going to have really strong loads. We're lucky in the airline industry, we can see forward sales, so we're always booking ahead, or people are always booking ahead. So as we look at the summer today, we're seeing really strong fares, we're seeing strong demand on most of our key routes. We've got very high ancillary revenues, so our business model is to have very low headline fares, fill the aircraft up, and then sell ancillary products as people choose to.
So what would that be, for example?
A seat, a bag, a bundle, priority boarding, flexibility, insurance, cars. So all of those choices that people make over and above the basic seat. And we've got incredibly strong ancillary revenue, so amongst the top airlines in the world. So I think the business is in great shape.
But again, speaking of the Google search, the headlines, there's a story of 4 of the planes being repossessed, of a pause being put on expansion plans. We saw Lynx shut down, Discount Airline. I mean, some people are worried about Flair. You know, like, well, is Flair going to be around in a year's time?
It absolutely is. Look, I'm not pretending it's been an easy ride. The lease terminations we think were unlawful. We immediately sued the people that did that, and that's working its way through the courts now. Lynx was a good airline. They had the same purpose as us. The purpose is to make travel affordable to all Canadians, and they shared that same purpose with us. They were a little bit smaller than us and a little bit later to the game, and so unfortunately they didn't make it. But the purpose was the same. So yeah, it hasn't been without its problems. This is a tough game. It's a tough game. There's lots of airlines that start and fail, but Flair's not going to. Flair's now got a solid platform. The brand is well known in Canada, and yeah, I think we're in great shape.
And let's finish with this, maybe a wider look as an insider in the industry. What should we as Canadians expect to see, do you think, in the airline industry over, pick your time frame, the next year or two?
Look, I'd go out even further than that and go 10 years out and say, what is this going to look like 10 years from now? I think, to me, there are 2 things that are certain. Number one is that Air Canada is still going to be around. I think they're a great airline. I think they serve a different part of the market to us. They're a global network carrier, corporate, business, government. And the other thing I think is certain is that there will be a strong, large carrier serving the leisure market. I think you have to pick a track, pick a lane. And our lane is low-cost leisure. And I think Air Canada's lane is full service. We're low-cost leisure. I think if you find yourself in the middle, it's a very difficult place to be. You have to know who you are and be very pure to that and stick to it. It guides all of your decision making. So I think we're going to see a segregation out. I think we're going to see a larger leisure carrier, and I believe that's going to be Flair. I think Air Canada will continue to carry the flag.